Percy B. Shelley lived a brief and eccentric life wrought with tragedy and pain, but his unwavering belief in the goodness of humanity and the power of love can be seen in almost every corner of the world. His inspiring words have become a torch that lights the way in the darkness of tyranny and oppression. Shelley's poetry is some of the most vivid and imaginary poetry of the Romantic era, and his writing technique was specific to Shelley, as was the imagery he used. He called on his reader to have an extensive knowledge of literature and to push the boundaries of poetic form through his imagery and historical and cultural associations. These associations are often overlooked by readers that are far removed from the Romantic era. This video is intended to focus on one passage in Shelley's closet drama Prometheus Unbound to demonstrate to the viewer the subtle connections he is making. In order to achieve this, I will be incorporating the visual imagery of English painter John Martin and the comparative anatomy sketches from Baron Georges Cuvier to acquaint the reader of Shelley's poetry with the weaving techniques Shelley utilizes to create a complete idea. Before we move on to the crux of my thesis, some background information on the Romantic period and Prometheus in ancient Greek literature and theater is necessary to fully understand Shelley's methodology. First, let me define the term closet drama. It is simply a play that is not intended to be performed, but instead read by a solitary reader. This form emerges in ancient Rome and is most prevalent in the philosophical dialogues of Plato and the works of tragedians like Seneca the Younger. The closet drama gives Shelley a classical form to begin shaping his epic poem, Prometheus Unbound. The character of Prometheus first appears in Hesiod's Theogony and Works and Days, written around 700 BCE. In Hesiod's works, Prometheus serves as a cautionary tale of what can happen if you anger the gods. In later classical works, such as Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, Prometheus becomes a savior of mankind through his creation of humankind and the gift of fire, which leads to other Promethean writers expanding these gifts to encompass the arts and sciences. During the Romantic era, art, politics, literature, philosophy, and culture all rely heavily on the influence of classical Greek and Roman ideology. While writing Prometheus Unbound, Shelley is in Italy. He's visiting Rome and Greece and the surrounding ruins while at the same time avoiding the constraints of the sedition and libel laws plaguing the publishing industry in England. Shelley utilizes his surroundings in the works he creates from 1819 onward. Shelley's choice of form is purposeful, as is his choice to re-envision Aeschylus's great tragedy, Prometheus Bound. His most deliberate choices may be in the weaving process he uses and in his choice of characters. In the play, Shelley's choice to make Prometheus a character resembling John Milton's character of Satan in Paradise Lost varies from the creator idea in classical mythology, but he still incorporates the idea of the punished savior and the illusion of freedom. His choice to place Jupiter as the oppressor rather than Zeus shows the breadth of time and the expansion of the pantheon that Shelley intends the reader to consider throughout the work, culminating with the canceled cycles of Act 4. Shelley's choices are deliberate and of the utmost importance in understanding the full meaning of the poem and his weaving process. Shelley highlights this in his preface to his greatest work, Prometheus Unbound. Shelley writes, "The Greek tragic writers, in selecting as their subject any portion of their natural history or mythology, employed in their treatment of it a certain arbitrary discretion. They by no means conceived themselves bound to adhere to the common interpretation or to imitate the story as in title their rivals and predecessors. Such a system would have amounted to a resignation of those claims to preference over their competitors which incited in composition. The Agamemnonian story was exhibited on the Athenian theater with as many variations as dramas. I have presumed to employ a similar license. The Prometheus Unbound of Aeschylus supposed the reconciliation of Jupiter with his victim as the price of the disclosure of the danger threatened to his empire by the consummation of his marriage with Thetis. Thetis, according to this view of the subject, was given in marriage to Peleus, and Prometheus, by the permission of Jupiter, delivered from his captivity by Hercules. Had I framed my story on this model, I should have done no more than have attempted to restore the lost drama of Aeschylus, an ambition which, if my preference to this mode of treating the subject had incited me to cherish, the recollection of the high comparisons such an attempt would challenge might well abate. But in truth, I was averse from a catastrophe so feeble as that of reconciling the champion with the oppressor of mankind. The moral interest of the fable, which is so powerfully sustained by the suffering and endurance of Prometheus, would have been annihilated if we could conceive of him as unsaying the high language and quailing before his successful and perfidious adversary. The only imaginary being resembling in any degree Prometheus is Satan, and Prometheus is, in my judgment, a more poetical character than Satan, because in addition to courage and majesty and firm and patient opposition to omnipotent force, he is susceptible of being described as exempt from the taints of ambition, envy, revenge, and a desire for personal aggrandizement, which in the hero of Paradise Lost interfere with the interest. The character of Satan engenders in the mind a pernicious causatory which leads us to weigh his faults with his wrongs, and to excuse the former because of the latter exceeded in all measure. In the minds of those who consider the magnificent fiction with a religious feeling, it engenders something worse. But Prometheus is, as it were, the type of the highest perfection of moral and intellectual nature, impelled by the purest and truest motives to the best and noblest ends. It is in these choices that Shelley melds ideas together to form a final vision of a new world born in love and free from the tyranny and oppression England was experiencing at the time. Our journey into that world begins now. Prometheus Unbound, Act 1, begins with our hero Prometheus chained to a peak in the Caucasus Mountains. This mountain range is prevalent in ancient mythology. It is a sacred place, and Marko Gregovic, co-founder of Crowdfunding Academy, describes the importance. In ancient mythologies, the Caucasus Mountains represent the end of the world. For the Greeks, they were the pillars of the world, as the Greek word Caucasus translates to the support pillars of the earth. Both of these representations allow Shelley to manipulate ideas on the end of the world and the strength of the Promethean gifts. Act 1 also finds Prometheus struggling to recall his curse on Jupiter. So much time has passed that he cannot remember why he's there. Shelley often includes curses in his poetry, and John Jefferson, author of The Real Shelley, New Views on the Poet's Life, attributes this proclivity to Shelley's publication of The Necessity of Atheism and his strong statements on King George III at Eton College. Jefferson writes of Percy Shelley at Eton College, "Not content with deriding the masters and disobeying their orders at every turn, the boy also distinguished himself by the fervor and blasphemous ingenuity with which he used to curse the king, and used also to curse his own father." The Shelley family men were known for cursing each other. Shelley documents his grandfather, B. Shelley, and his treatment of his father, Timothy Shelley, with great tenacity, writing, "My grandfather, Sir Biche, partly, but principally my friend, Dr. Lind at Eton, when anything goes wrong at Field Place, my father does nothing but swear all day long afterwards. Whenever I have gone with my father to visit Sir Biche, he always received him with tremendous oath, and continued to heap curses upon his head, so long as he remained in the room." Shelley uses this curse in Prometheus Unbound as the catalyst and motivation for a new age of man, free from the curses of their fathers. Act 2 follows Panthea and Asia as they follow the song of the spirits and the echoes to the cave of Demogorgon, where Asia is determined to rally support for her love Prometheus by enlisting the help of Demogorgon. Demogorgon is the vehicle used by Shelley to drag Jupiter to the abyss. Asia, in anger, lists the extensive list of Promethean gifts that Jupiter fails to recognize. For Shelley to achieve his ultimate vision of a world built in love, Asia too must free herself from the anger over the chaining of Prometheus in order to step into the world of light and love that he imagines. The gifts Asia lists in Act 2 show the transformation and growth of Promethean influence over man since Prometheus first appeared in Hesiod's Theogony. As Prometheus transforms from a punished figure to a champion and savior of mankind, the gifts are expanded from author to author. Fire makes the possibilities of man boundless. The Industrial Revolution and the evolutionary ideas of modern science were highlighting the importance of the Promethean gift. As you can see from the chart of Promethean gifts, Shelley nearly doubles the gifts Aeschylus expanded on, and this helps the reader to see Prometheus as a savior for all mankind and the hero Shelley needs him to be. After Asia's visit to the cave of Demogorgon and enlisting his help, the veil has been lifted. Panthea immediately notices a change in her sister, stating in Act 2, Scene 2, line 15, "How thou art changed." This notable change allows Shelley to use Asia's forgiveness to transform her into the woman and wife of Prometheus, and upon the fall of Jupiter in Act 3, Prometheus is freed from his craggy prison to triumph over the tyranny and oppression with love and forgiveness. As Act 3 begins with Jupiter upon his throne and Thetis and the other deities assembled around him, Jupiter touts his omnipotence, but he is well aware of the threat of man. The soul of man, like unextinguished fire, yet burns towards heaven with fierce reproach and doubt and lamentation and reluctant prayer, hurling up insurrection which might make our antique empire insecure. Thought built on eldest faith and hell's convivial fear. Jupiter's description is not of human subjects willing to serve an omnipotent God, but instead Shelley describes an antiquated empire built on old faith and the fear of hell. This idea that one should find God through fear and uncertainty does not appeal to Shelley, and his early views on religion appear again just as they did in the early days of his poetry at Eton College with the necessity of atheism. Prometheus has foreseen the fall of Jupiter at the hand of his son, and Jupiter knows his days are numbered. He goes on to state, "Unrepressed, yet soon to fall, even now I have begotten a strange wonder, that fatal child, the terror of earth, who waits but till the destined hour arrives." Then, according to the stage directions in the play, the car of the hour arrives, and Demogorgon ascends to drag the tyrant Jupiter into the deep. After the world is freed of this oppressor, the spirit of the hour describes the change at the end of Act 3, as Prometheus and Asia make their way to their new home in the cave of Prometheus. There was a change. The impalpable thin air and the all-circling sunlight were transformed, as if the sense of love dissolved them, had folded itself round the sphered world. Shelley's original version of Prometheus Unbound was only in 3 acts, ending in a world of love and transformation, Shelley's ultimate goal. Shelley sent the 3-act version of the play off to the publisher in June of 1819 with a copy of the Cinci. However, inspiration loomed nearby. Shelley's life was plunged into depression and darkness with the death of both of their children. Their lives took an unplanned intermission. Little Claire Shelley died in between the writing of Act 1 and 2 of Prometheus Unbound, and William Shelley died on the 7th of June of 1819, just a few short days before Shelley sent his original manuscript of Prometheus Unbound to the printer. Mary Shelley famously writes of this period with disdain and heartbreak. "We came to Italy thinking to do Shelley's health good, but the climate is not any means warm enough to be of benefit to him, and yet it is that that has destroyed my 2 children. We went from England comparatively prosperous and happy. I should return broken-hearted and miserable. I never know one moment's ease from the wretchedness and despair that possesses me. This pain was compounded when Shelley learns of the violent and deadly outbreak at St. Peter's Square in Manchester on the 16th of August, 1819. A large group of reformers, approximately 60 to 80,000 people, had gathered in St. Peter's Square to hear the famed orator Henry Hunt. The group was assembling to show their support for universal suffrage, better working conditions, and the lack of representation on taxation issues. First-hand accounts state that local cavalry showed up intoxicated and with bayonets drawn, charged into the crowd of activists, killing 18 and injuring 700 or more. This unimaginable act of violence on peaceful citizen rallies the radical spirit of Shelley and inspires his last great period of creativity. In September of 1819, Shelley embarks on some of his most radical and scathing poetic statements on the state of England. England in 1819 is a direct response to the state of England under King George III and his Prince Regent. England in 1819. An old, mad, blind, despised, and dying king. Princes, the dregs of their dull race, who flow through the public scorn, mud from a muddy spring. Rulers who neither see nor feel nor know, but leech-like to their fainting country cling till they drop, blind in blood without a blow. A people starved and stabbed in the untilled field. An army whom liberticide and prey makes a two-edged sword to all who wield. Golden and sanguine laws which tempt to slay. Religion Christless, godless. A book sealed. A Senate time's worst statue unrepealed. Are graves from which a glorious phantom may burst to illuminate our tempest day. This call to action also inspires Shelley's Mask of Anarchy, a text so revolutionary Leigh Hunt refuses to publish it until 1832, long after Shelley's death. This poem inspires a spirit of revolt that has transcended the boundaries of Shelley's time, and lines from this poem have been recanted by protesters long after. This poem was chanted by the students taking a stand in Tiananmen Square in 1989, and by the people of Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution in 2011, but most recently championed by the British Labour Party in 2017 as they address the disproportionate wealth distribution in England currently. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few, becomes the slogan for the British Labour Party as they fight the 1% in England today. This period of inspiration also spurs Shelley to write the final act to Prometheus Unbound. Shelley chooses to end his drama with a mask. The literary mask developed in the 16th and 17th century and is a masquerade ball meant to celebrate an event like the overthrowing of tyrannical leaders. The mask tradition developed from the elaborate pageants and courtly shows of Burgundy in the late Middle Ages. Masks were typically a complimentary offering to the prince among his guests and might combine pastoral settings, mythological fables, and the dramatic elements of an ethical debate. There would invariably be some political and social application of the allegory. This seems to be the most fitting form for Shelley's final act to Prometheus Unbound, providing the elements necessary to demonstrate the fallacy of imbalanced power. Act 4 culminates in a vision of biblical proportion. Shelley's vision echoes the prophetic nature of Ezekiel's visions, and it is steeped in the metaphorical imagery Shelley weaves so well. The Romantic poets saw themselves as teachers or prophets of the new age, and Shelley's prophecy creates the apocalypse needed to cleanse England of the blood of many on its shores and in its fields, those who were martyred in the name of decency and humanity. This vision allows Shelley to wash away the old ways of England and replaces them with a new dawn born in love and forgiveness. What Shelley describes are two chariots careening along opposite sides of a stream or a rivulet divided by an island, and the path is overgrown with mossy, low-hanging trees. Panthea describes the two chariots in Act 4. But see, where through two openings in the forest which hanging branches over canopy, and where two runnels of a rivulet between the closed moss, violet interwoven, have made their path of melody, like sisters who part with sighs that they may meet in smiles, turning their dear disunion to an isle of lovely grief, a wood of sweet sad thoughts. Two visions of strange radiance float upon the ocean-like enchantment of strong sound, which flows intenser, keener, deeper yet, under the ground and through the windless air. Ione sees and describes the first chariot as it comes through the forest. I see a chariot like that thinnest boat in which the mother of the months is born, by ebbing night into her western cave, when she upsprings from their interlunar dreams, or which is curved an orb-like canopy of gentle darkness, and the hills and woods distinctly seen through at dusk airy veil, regard like shapes in an enchanter's glass. Its wheels are solid clouds, azure and gold, such as the genii of the thunderstorms pile on the floor of the illuminated sea. When the sun rushes under it, they roll and move and grow as with an inward wind. Within it sits a winged infant, white its countenance, like the whiteness of the bright snow. Its plumes are as feathers of sunny frost. Its limbs gleam white, though the wind-flowing folds of its white robe woof the ethereal pearl. Its hair is white, the brightness of white light scattered in strings, yet its two eyes are heavens of liquid darkness, which the deity within seems pouring, as a storm is poured from jagged clouds out of their arrowy lashes, tempering the cold and radiant air around with fire that is not brightness. In its hands it sways a quivering moonbeam, from whose point a guiding power directs the chariot's prow over its wheeled clouds, which as they roll over the grass and flowers and waves, wake sounds sweet as a singing rain of silver dew. Shelley's vision calls for the reader to imagine these chariots and the characters within these chariots as the passage of time, and the two chariots careening towards one another alongside the rivulet are drudging up the remnants of ages of man that have long passed by. Panthea describes the tilling of the soil in great detail. She describes the earth chariot. And from a star upon its forehead shoot like swords of azure fire, or golden spears with tyrant-quelling myrtle overtwined, embleming heaven and earth united now, vast beams like spokes of some invisible wheel, which whirl as the orb whirls, swifter than thought, filling the abyss with the sun-like lightnings, and perpendicular now, and now transverse, pierce the dark soil, and as they pierce and pass, make bare the secrets of the earth's deep heart, infinite mine of adamant and gold, valueless stones and unimagined gems, and caverns of crystalline columns poised with vegetable silver overspread, wells of unfathomed fire, and water springs whence the great sea, even as a child, is fed, whose vapors clothe earth's monarch mountain tops with kingly ermine snow. The beams flash on and make appear the melancholy ruins of cancelled cycles. Anchors, beaks of ships, planks turned into marble, quivers, helms and spears and gorgon-headed targes, and the wheels of scythed chariots, and the emblazonry of trophies, standards, and armorial beasts round which death laughed. Sepulchred emblems of dead destruction, ruin within ruin. The wrecks beside many a vast city whose population which the earth grew over was mortal, but not yet human. See, they lie. Their monstrous works and uncouth skeletons, their statues, homes, and fanes, prodigious shapes huddled in gray annihilation, split, jammed in the hard black deep, and over these the anatomies of unknown winged things, and fishes which were isles of living scale, and serpents' bony chains twisted around the iron crags or within heaps of dust, to which the torturous strength of their last pangs had crushed the iron crags, and over these the jagged alligator, and the might of earth-convulsing behemoth, which once were monarch beast, and on the slimy shores and weed-overgrown continents of earth increased and multiplied like summer worms on an abandoned corpse, till the blue globe wrapped deluge round it like a cloak, and they yelled, gasped, and were abolished, or some god whose throne was in a comet passed and cried, "Be not!" and like my words, they were no more. It's in these last few lines that we see the influence of science in the 19th century. During this time, comparative anatomy was rising in Europe and all over the world. The study of fossils allowed science to look back at our past, and what science was uncovering was the fragments of civilizations that once thrived, that had long been covered over by the years and what Shelley calls the canceled cycles. What is being unearthed by these chariots are the instruments of war that denote a time of oppression by one group over another. Also being discovered were the bones of animals unidentifiable due to the extinction and evolution which was wrapped up in the discoveries of the time. Georges Cuvier, the father of paleontology, was at the forefront of this movement. Cuvier is most well known for his work in the field of comparative anatomy. Cuvier is the first to propose mass extinction due to catastrophe in ancient mastodons in the Ohio River Valley. But also his theory of catastrophe dictates that not only does time erase ruins through gradual covering over, it can also destroy and shape the earth through a series of catastrophic events that mar the surface of the earth and can drastically impact or eradicate the life nearby through the impacts of comets and asteroids, which might trigger earthquakes, rapid melting of ice sheets, and eventually floods that oftentimes wash away the evidence of destruction. Shelley's use of Cuvier's theories allows Shelley the breadth of time needed to call for a cleansing. Elizabeth Effinger expands on Cuvier's importance in her dissertation entitled The Romantic Posthuman and Posthumanities. She says, Georges Cuvier's essay on the theory of the earth looked to explain the fossil evidence of creatures no longer alive on the earth as evidence of extinction. Part of the Earth's history of successive epochs of catastrophes or revolutions. However, Shelley's Prometheus Unbound troubles a strictly Cuvierian understanding of the Earth's history, whereas Cuvier imagines these massive extinction events as having occurred prior to the birth of humanity, which is how he explains the absence of human fossils within the Earth. Shelley tunnels mole-like into the deep history of the earth and curiously places man alongside and even beneath the inhumane. Cuvier's work led him to discover a new dwarf species of alligator in Paraguay in 1807, which was widely touted across England. Shelley's inclusion of the uncouth skeletons, jagged alligators, and comets, followed by an earth-cleansing deluge, all point to Cuvier's discoveries. But readers often miss this connection due to the rise of Charles Lyell's theory of uniformitarianism. Catastrophism is eventually overwritten by Charles Lyell's theory of uniformitarianism, which hails the gradual formation of the Earth over the catastrophic nature of the formation of the surface of the Earth, which Cuvier had outlined. This transformation in the science impedes the modern reader's understanding of the deluge necessary to wash the old world oppressed by Jupiter away. If the reader misses the connection of the comet to the deluge in the last lines of Panthea, they might not understand the full idea Shelley is integrating. Panthea's last lines in the play are the blue globe wrapped deluge round it like a cloak, and they yelled, gasped, and were abolished, or some god whose throne was in a comet passed and cried, "Be not," and like my words they were no more. Shelley's interest in the sciences are described by Sophia Lanille in her article The Anatomy of Light, Astronomy, Optics, and Wave Dynamics in Percy B. Shelley's Epipsychidion and the Triumph of Life. She goes on to state, Shelley had always seen the scientific discourse of his times as a source of metaphors to express the nature of poetic creation. He was particularly drawn to astronomy, optics, and physics since they generated new conceptions of light. Shelley considered them as the condition of perception and thought, and therefore his works, scientific descriptions of light, of its nature and its behavior, came to symbolize the ability of poetry to apprehend and convey the poet's visionary insights. This Promethean interest in science was shared by many great thinkers of the Romantic era, including English painter and engraver John Martin. Martin gravitated toward the same imagery as Shelley. He intends to carry on the Prometheus ideology after Shelley's death. Martin was known to have assembled an elite group of influential people intent on forging a new path of enlightenment into modern industrial society. This influential dinner group, dubbed the Prometheans by biographer Max Adams, sought to change the world for the better by liberating all humans from the tyrannies of oppression and faith. At these weekly dinner parties or salons held by Martin, ideas spurred interactions between like-minded individuals. This type of communal discussion over dinner built an alliance between the greatest literary, politically radical, artistic, and scientific thinkers of the early 19th century. Martin's triptych of deluge paintings was hung at the Royal Academy in 1840. His painting, The Eve of the Deluge, was presented with a note that quoted Byron's Heaven and Earth. The sun, moon, and comet are represented in conjunction as one of the warning signs of the approaching doom. In the distance are the ocean, the mountains, and on lofty promontory, the ark. In the middle ground, the forest trees, convivial with the hour, when paradise upsprung. So massy, vast, yet green in their old age, the caverns and tents, the people reveling and resting. Upon the rock in the foreground, Methuselah, who has directed the opening of the scroll of his father Enoch, whilst agitated groups of figures and one of the giants of those days are hurrying to the spot where Noah displays the scroll, and Methuselah, having compared the portentous signs in the heavens with those represented in the scroll, at once perceives the fulfillment of the prophecy that the end is come, resigns his soul to God. Byron is directly referencing Cuvier in this passage, and you can clearly see the conjuncture of the sun, the moon, and the comet in the upper left of Martin's painting. The conjuncture sets Martin's apocalyptic imagery apart from others like Francis Danby, who caused some problems for Martin at the Royal Academy, claiming that he copied his deluge painting that was also hung that same year at the Royal Academy. The Cuvierian conjuncture differentiates Martin's painting from Danby's in at least one way. Martin's painting The Deluge was painted in 1834, a few years before Danby's Deluge was crafted. And you can see the conjuncture of the sun, the moon, and the comet in the middle of the picture. Max Adams' book, The Prometheans, claims Martin himself was acquainted closely with Cuvier, and according to Leopold Martin, who writes of an encounter between Cuvier and himself, reveals Cuvier's respect for Martin's work. Leopold writes, "An elderly, portly, fine-looking man, very anxious before leaving England for an introduction to my father, and for permission to inspect his paintings. The one on the easel at the moment was the important work, The Deluge. The visitor, after expressing his regret and disappointment at the absence of my father, placed a chair in front of the easel, and continued for a lengthened period to gaze without word or remark, seemingly wrapped in thought. At length he rose with the exclamation, 'Mon Dieu!' at the same time taking a small bouquet from his buttonhole, placing it on his card, and depositing both on my father's palette. He took his departure without another word. With some curiosity I returned to the painting room, wondering who the visitor could be. Think of my delight. The card was that of Baron Cuvier, and this was published in the Newcastle Weekly Chronicle on the 26th of January in 1889. Leopold Martin famously writes of Cuvier visiting Martin's studio, and Max Adams claims that Cuvier was often a visitor at his Promethean dinner salons. Martin's final painting in the triptych, The Assuaging of the Waters, was painted in 1840 and was the third painting in the set. As you can see, the influence of Cuvier's fossil discovery in the shallow pool left behind after the deluge has receded. If you look carefully, you can see the stratification that Martin uses, as well as a few fossilized remains of shells and small animals one might see after years of soil had been washed away by the raging waters of an angry god. Martin's painting The Last Judgment echoes the apocalyptic judgment Shelley leveled upon England in Prometheus Unbound. Martin's painting demonstrates the Shelleyan call for a cleansing at the top levels of English rule. Martin makes it very clear in his painting that the clergy and those English folk seated at the right hand of God perish in the last judgment of Christ. Martin's work was heavily influenced by what he was reading, as was Shelley's, and Cuvier's work gave these visionary idealists the imagery needed to expand on the political ideas that followed the Promethean view of human advancement. These three men are interconnected through science, art, and poetry. Shelley closes Prometheus Unbound with the words of Demogorgon, a didactic instructions for fighting off the oppressive nature of hierarchy and leaving men with the gift of apocalyptic literature. Demogorgon says, "To defy power which seems omnipotent, to love and bear, to hope till hope creates from its own wreck the thing it contemplates. Neither to change nor falter to repent this, like thy glory, Titan, is to be good, great and joyous, beautiful and free. This is alone life, joy, empire, and victory." As you can see, Shelley leaves hope, the one gift that the Promethean legacy ensures. Sadly, Shelley's life ends in a deluge as his ship, the Don Juan, capsizes in a storm just 2 short years after the publication of Prometheus Unbound. His lifeless body washed ashore, and he was found on the 19th of July, 1822, by Shelley's longtime friends Edward Trelawney, Lord Byron, and Leigh Hunt. According to Lynn Shepherd's A Treacherous Likeness, a few weeks before Shelley had set sail on his last voyage, he was awoken in the middle of the night by terrifying screaming, and Shelley was found in Mary's room, babbling wildly that he had seen an apparition of the Williams covered in blood, and the sea flooding into the house. Shelley's visionary life had left him with the one gift of prophecy, and left humanity with a vision of love and forgiveness that frees us from the chains of Prometheus.